Okay, well, good morning again, everybody. As Jules just mentioned, my name is Nora Loideain, and I'm director here at of the Information Law and Policy Centre, and I'd like to welcome you again to our annual conference on children and digital rights, regulating freedoms and safeguards. Excuse me. Without question, the internet provides children with more freedom to discover, create, learn, and share and engage with society than ever before. And this is something very much to be welcomed. And to quote Baroness Kidron, this is not a question of locking children out or sticking them in walled gardens. However, all too often, these great opportunities can also allow for unnecessary targeting and monitoring of children's internet usage. From the websites they follow and to what they share with others, to what they read, and also exposure to inappropriate, manipulated and false information may also threaten the adequate protection of their rights, well-being and safety, both online and offline. And it's these challenges that we want to debate and to discuss today at the annual conference, and particularly to talk about the roles in which policymakers, the tech industry, data protection authorities, civil society and academia can all play in developing policies that will ensure the adequate and effective protection of children's rights, excuse me, particularly their privacy, their freedom of expression and their safety both online and offline. And for this morning, it is my very great pleasure to introduce Baroness Beeban Kidron, is that right?
That's right.
Who will be giving the Centre's annual lecture, which will launch our discussion today on these crucial policy-making questions that are currently before the UK Parliament in their scrutiny of the Data Protection Bill, and other issues as well that are also before governments around the world dealing with children's rights and implementation of new information rights. So Baroness Beeban Kidron OBE is a crossbench member of the House of Lords and a member of the House of Lords Communications Committee. She sits on the UN Broadband Commission for Sustainable Development, the Royal Foundation's Taskforce of Growing Up Digital, and is the founder of 5 Rights, a campaign that delivers the established rights of children in the digital environment. Baroness Kidron is also an award-winning filmmaker and co-founded the educational charity Interfilm, which uses film to educate children and has over 17,000 film clubs across the UK. So in terms of format for the annual lecture this morning, Baroness Kidron will be speaking for approximately 30 minutes, which will leave us some time afterwards for some Q&A. We'll then have a short break before we move on to our keynote panel. So I would like to thank Baroness Kidron for coming here today, and for all of you for joining us today for our annual conference, and to invite her to present her lecture on the question of are children more than clickbait in the 21st century?
So what I wanted to talk about this morning was the rights and privileges of childhood, and about how we might start to address the imbalance of power between tech and children in the digital environment. And I'd really like to start with the concept of childhood. Childhood is the word we use to describe the journey from dependence to autonomy, from infancy to maturity. And whilst different individual children and different personal, social, economic circumstances impact hugely on that journey, we have, over time, established an understanding of this transition in terms of childhood norms and childhood needs that academics call childhood development milestones. A development milestone is an age, or more commonly an age range, by which certain maturities and understandings are likely to be achieved. Conversely, an age or age range when certain maturities and understandings are unlikely or not supposed to be in place. So whilst a child 3 to 5 is beginning to understand that others feel and experience life differently to them, they aren't yet able to critically evaluate information and will take what they are told at face value. And in fact, it isn't until a child is 13 to 15 that it will develop a heightened sensitivity to risk. Our understanding of the physical, neurological, and emotional changes that take place during childhood has shaped society's response to it. So whilst we take the view that parents and those with parental responsibility for children offer the first line in both care for and defence of children, we've also concluded that children, by virtue of their age and the vulnerabilities associated with that age, require a broader set of inputs, privileges and protections beyond those offered by family. They include a complex but widely understood and respected set of social norms, educational frameworks, advisory bodies, regulatory interventions, and national and international laws. And perhaps the most recognised expression of our common understanding of rights and privileges of childhood is the UN Charter of the Rights of the Child, the most ratified treaty in the world with 196 signatories. A glaring exception is the country host to the major tech companies, but nonetheless, it serves as a codified description of what we collectively believe is necessary to ensure a safe and secure environment for children. In addition to the UNCRC, we design and mitigate for childhood in multiple ways across all aspects of society. For example, we educate. We consider paediatric medicine to be distinct specialism and require doctors to obtain additional skills and expertise. We don't criminalise very young children and impose public interest tests on CPS when considering prosecuting older children. We don't allow adults to hold children to contractual obligations. We put pedestrian crossings near schools. We rate films based according to development stages. Children have special protections around sexual activity. We make it illegal for them to smoke, drink and gamble. And we even take steps to protect them in environments where adults smoke, drink and gamble. In short, the overriding understanding is that society must, above all other considerations, act in the best interest of the child, reflecting a global consensus that the capacity of a child to understand and act is necessarily limited by the vulnerabilities and immaturities associated with their age. Yet the digital environment does not reflect this consensus. Several years ago, I interviewed a number of people credited with inventing the World Wide Web for a film project, and repeatedly they described the vision, the original vision of the web, as a democratizing technology where all users would be treated equally and gatekeepers would be banished. And it was in the middle of an interview with Nick Negroponte I had one of those moments that change your life and change your consciousness, because I realized there was a category error. Because however good it sounds at first, if you treat everyone equally, de facto, you're treating a child as if they were an adult. And a child is a child until they reach maturity, not until the moment that they reach for their smartphone. Perhaps more importantly than the category error that I identified was that other promise, to get rid of the gatekeepers. The founders' utopian vision of a network of open source smallholders with a chain of active participant users had been rapidly replaced by a handful of powerful platforms that quickly made the digital environment more powerful, less responsive, more autocratic and less accountable than the gatekeepers that they had promised to replace. In fact, it made a handful of young, privileged men, mainly young, mainly privileged, and mainly men, insanely rich and insanely powerful on a global scale with no balancing oversight nor societal responsibilities. And that is something that governments, international institutions, and several increasingly unhappy inventors and founders are only now beginning to understand. It is in the DNA of Silicon Valley, famously articulated by Mark Zuckerberg, to move fast and break things. But in this breathless journey to innovate, to communicate, and yes, to make money, they have not properly considered that some of the things they may be breaking are our children. In creating an environment that does not consider the needs of a child user, they have in fact rejected decades of hard-won, hugely precious cultural, social and legal norms of childhood. Perhaps at first unconsciously, but for the last 10 years at least wittingly, denigrating the hard-won privileges and protections that a century and a half of careful consideration, research and lawmaking across the globe has afforded children. In doing so, they have actually changed the status of childhood in the plain sight of parents, media, civil society and governments. And I would actually like to pause for a second to deal with this myth of children as digital natives, which implies that they've grown up in some exotic land which they understand and embrace in a way that we adults never will. But if we accept that analysis, we become foot soldiers for Silicon Valley's vast group of lobbyists who would have us believe that the kids are ahead of the game. And they most definitely are not. As the longitudinal study of EU Online consistently shows, children are and remain on the lowest ladder of digital opportunity because they spend the most time on a few highly commercial sites, have the least critical understanding and facility to understand, organize, or use the information they are presented with online. As an eminent child psychologist wrote, using technology with two fast thumbs cannot, in itself, be taken as evidence that a child is a creative participant in the digital environment with full literacy, citizenship, and agency, which, in non-academic language, means just because you can access technology, it doesn't mean you can understand it or control it. And I would particularly like to alight on the concept of agency to which the psychologist refers. A child that has agency has the ability to make choices based on information that has been provided in a way that they can understand and in conditions in which that choice is meaningful. And with that in mind, I'd like to repeat a conversation I recently had with the head of IT at BT, Rachel Hyam. She described the bundle of technological methods currently used to capture and hold our attention on the tubing, gaming and social media platforms where children spend so much of their time. This bundle she referred to as captology. It is its own science, the science of capturing a person's attention and keeping them in rapture. And it can include soft rhythmic sounds or music to block out real life, sharp narrative sounds to pull the user's attention to what is happening on screen, bright intense light that vibrates intermittently at high speed, cycles of intense activity followed by a slow end like changing an avatar or responding to a message or being congratulated, only to be interrupted by something fast and even more intense to drag the user back just as they're ready to quit. She explained that this is because if you think you're getting off but come back at the last minute, you stay a great deal longer than if you are attached for a single exhausting session at the same pace. Vibrating devices, confirmation signals for peers, random confirmations, personal streaks, community streaks, attracting your attention with a keyword or image that you've just seen or used in another setting, attracting your attention with an extreme word or powerful image, attracting your attention by showing you that others in your circle online are getting more attention, seeing something more extreme, etc., etc., the colour blue. This list, though exhausting, is not exhaustive, but you get the idea. A child, not yet fully formed, does not have the developmental capacity to resist one or another or a combination of these pulls. And the algorithms follow their behavior on such tight loops that they can, in real time, provide the exact personalized mix to keep them clicking. So if one child is more responsive to image and confirmation from peers, but another responds to the sharp sounds and being set challenges, each will get the loop of events that will most entice them to their own personalized state of rapture. These techniques are digital norms that I'm sure we all recognize from our own experience, but they are especially potent when deployed against children whose brains are still being molded and whose critical thinking has not yet matured. And most importantly, they deliberately orchestrate a context in which a child cannot make a meaningful choice whether or not to engage with their digital environment, i.e., to exercise their agency. They are in a digital sweet shop, which, however attractive, is not a wholly balanced diet, and being stuck there is not in the best interest of the child. Research carried out by Common Sense Media in 2016 found that in the US, 70% of teachers argued with their parents about their devices. 32% said their devices caused arguments on a daily basis. Research conducted across childhood age groups on multiple occasions reflects similar patterns. Earlier this year, tech-related conflict was widely reported as the top cause of familial discord in the UK. Now, I have spent my whole life working in media. I set up an organisation that encourages children to watch films online. I regularly co-create technology with children, and I am a strong advocate for the right of children to access the digital environment. But I see a tension between a technology that has a singular power to redress some of the world's greatest challenges and inequities, and a corporate culture that resolutely rejects its societal responsibilities to the communities in which it operates and to the people that it so successfully commodifies. And I am not alone. Jaron Lanier, inventor of virtual reality, Sean Parker, co-founder of Facebook, and Brett Taylor, the designer of the like button, have, in various public pronouncements over the last few weeks alone, decried the problematic use of technology against its users. In fact, Jared Lanier accused tech of having gone over the threshold into behaviorist scientific experiments in which behavior is provoked by stimuli that can guarantee changed human behaviors, and that the well-being of the nation, by which he meant America, depends on stopping it, and he called for a new culture in which users have dignity and autonomy. I would say not only the well-being of America, but the well-being of children the world over. Because whether a child loves cartoons, football, fashion, music, or comedy, whether they are a gamer, a tuber, a social media junkie, or simply interested in the news, online services routinely deploy the full power of their data-churning algorithms to ensure that that child is perpetually bombarded with a bespoke recipe of emotional and technological pulls, designed by engineers, delivered by robots, in an environment where neither the engineers nor the robots have any responsibility for the consequence. These bespoke, or should I say, personalized recipes are designed to keep our children online, clicking for as long as possible. And as the recent dispute with YouTube showed, in which machine learning algorithms generated content, capitalizing popular trends and keyword searches, resulted in thousands of deeply creepy, sometimes violent videos being watched by hundreds of thousands of really young children. These videos do not reflect social norms of childhood, and no one stepped in to temper the consequences of leaving algorithms to decide what children were watching. YouTube has, under pressure, finally responded and said it will restrict these videos once they're reported, a solution that, if you think about it, relies on preschoolers policing content. Where children are the end user, we need better oversight than that. Children year on year spend more and more time online. For a 12 to 15-year-old in the UK, it was 20 plus hours last year. But I actually share the opinion of Professor Sonia Livingstone that it is inadequate to look at how long children are online. We should be looking at what they are doing online and what being online is doing to them. Being online, and I really want to stress this, being online is not in and of itself bad, risky, unhealthy, or any other negative. However, commercial environments, largely designed for adults that demand significant levels of interaction and normalize the spread of personal information, are not great environments for children to spend the bulk of their leisure time. These young people are entering contracts, giving away vast swathes of personal information and using services that do not take account of their age, and they are emerging sleepless, anxious, and overexposed. And it cannot be a good use of technology to allow its brightest and finest to ignore the needs of the most vulnerable demographic in our society. And it equally must be a failure for any government, international institution, or legislative body not to do what it can to tackle these new norms. And the answer is, and I'm going to stress it again, not to kick children out of the digital environment. On the contrary, every child should be allowed to access the digital environment creatively, knowledgeably, and safely. But the digital environment is a network of businesses that provide services to children, and those businesses need to be responsive to the children's presence on those services. And it was that simple principle that led me to found 5 rights, the rights that would, in effect, deliver the rights of the UN Charter in online settings. And over the last several years, 5 rights has made many interventions, worked with many organisations, and our mission is to take every opportunity on all platforms in any country to make the case that kids need access to the digital world, always access, but on new and improved terms. And those terms must include their right to change their digital footprint and identity, to be safe and supported in online settings, to understand who, how, and what their data is being used for, to be informed and creative participant digital citizens, and above all, to have agency, meaningful choice in an environment that is responsive to and respectful of their full complement of rights and needs as minors. So I am hoping that by now you're persuaded we have a problem, and that if I haven't, I'll be back next year, because it's going to be worse and you'll all have children with panda eyes looking at their devices, which of course does make them clickbait in the 21st century. But I actually want to move on to what next, and I have to start with the panacea, or the non-panacea, that is self-regulation. And that is, or would be, or could be, a whole speech in itself. So whilst I'm sure it will come up again later today, here's my brief ABC. A, Silicon Valley is not very interested in children. They're really interested in drones and driverless cars, conquering space and cryogenics, operational leverage. It's specifically how robots can replace humans to provide high gross margins and, of course, share price, but not very interested in children. The third of all users that are children are an inconvenient truth for big tech, beautifully illustrated by the fact that they consistently refuse to collect data to monitor underage use of their services, or indeed anything else that happens to children in life. B, there is both an explicit and implicit message from industry that we have to make children resilient and inform them of risk. And we do have to do both of those things, and I do want to go on record to say that industry, in both of those cases, do excellent work. But there is a great deal less appetite to design their services fit for kids in the first place. And I see no world order in which the duty should rest on a child to adapt to the needs of tech, rather than tech adapt to the needs of children. C, whenever we talk of codes and conditions, there's a unified response that any form of conditionality would mean they have to turn their back on young people, throwing them off their platforms and services. If the choice between adult service, as if the choice was between they must use adult services or nothing at all. Well, for me, this is at best diversionary. This demographic is nearly 1 billion current users, so undoubtedly someone else will see the competitive advantage in developing services for them. But more insidious is what it says about their corporate attitude to young people. And it does rather suggest to me that leaving them in charge is a little bit like leaving the fox in charge of the hen house. Just to be an unreliable narrator, I actually do have a D. My A to C has a D. Which is that this is no longer a new environment. It's 27 years old, and unlike many of its users, it's fully grown up. And much like all the information technologies before, and all the industrial sectors, and all the global companies before them, tech is ready to take on and live up to its adult responsibilities. If you earn and own more than most nation states, your responsibilities and the resources, and finding the resources to meet them, are self-evident. And equally self-evident is that year on year kids are having a harder and harder time online. And it is time to bring this brave new world of tech into the real world of the 21st century, where every other business, corporation, state, civil society actor, every human on the planet lives or fails to live by a set of agreed standards upheld by regulation. Now, of course, what's needed is a global agreement that has at its heart some key provisions about the rights of users, but we're not there yet, sadly. And like others who take an interest in this space, I see a future where we will all be individual data providers that commercial companies and other organizations will be able to access on terms and conditions that we set to reflect our limits, our tolerances, and our interests. That this first data gold rush will be somewhat tempered, and there will be a value attributed to privacy and autonomy. And it's likely that some of the winners in this second wave will be those who provide services in an atmosphere and with community rules that we as consumers and citizens find a little more palatable. But that also is not now. And if anyone has a fiver, I would love to have a bet, because I think it will be sooner than you all think. But now, we first have to dispel the double myth that is inherent in the digital environment, that it cannot reflect jurisdictions and it cannot be regulated. On the first point, I just point to China, a different jurisdiction, a different service. Or, as in the case of the GDPR, instigated in Europe, not only does it offer local derogations, but many global companies, having absorbed its articles and recitals, are planning to roll it out worldwide. The GDPR, imperfect as it is proof that regulation can be absorbed on a local and global scale. And at a dinner on Wednesday night, I was absolutely delighted when the IT lead of one of the biggest pharma companies in the world said to me, and this is actually a paraphrase, there was 2 glasses of red wine, so I really don't remember, but he said something like, whilst the rules of GDPR are perhaps a little opaque, its intention is utterly clear. So we are working to the intention because that is the right thing to do. So finally, a small step that I, with the support of colleagues right across the political divide, are making. We've tabled a set of amendments to the data protection bill that would, if passed, recalibrate slightly the relationship of digital tech to children. For those of you with a professional interest in this, I would direct you to Hansard from the 6th of November, and if you're a real anorak, I can tell you it's column 1579. And I set out the amendments in great detail. But for this morning, I will spare you that and just say that what the amendments do is make the consent of a child or a parent acting on behalf of a child meaningful by requiring data controllers who seek that consent to meet minimum standards of age-appropriate design. Subsequent amendments deal with creating guidance and parliamentary oversight. Now, of course, one small set of amendments on a data bill in one country on one specific part of a child's digital life is not a complete solution. But these amendments do a few important things. They firmly separate a child's data from that of an adult. They build on the industry norm of personalisation and take existing technology and set it to work for the child user. This one boy said to me, how come if they know I like red Nikes, they don't know I'm 12? That's a good question. They meet the United Kingdom's current obligation to ensure that our national legislation is compatible with the GDPR and safeguards our prospects of securing adequacy agreement post-Brexit. They enshrine the long-held view that the first duty of any government is to protect its citizens. Most importantly, those too vulnerable to protect themselves, and therefore fulfills our duty of care to children. Detailed guidelines are necessarily in the future, but what the amendment asks the Information Commissioner to take into account are such matters as a child's need for high privacy settings by default, not revealing their GPS location, using their data only to enable them to use the services they wish and no more, not automatically excluding them if they will not give up vast swathes of data, however nicely and in whatever language you ask. If the Commissioner so wished, it could also mean giving a child time off by not sending endless notifications during school hours or sleep hours, deactivating features designed to promote extended use, making commercially driven content visible and understood by a minor, and insisting on reporting processes with an endpoint and a reasonable expectation of resolution. None of these things are beyond existing technology. None of them hold back innovation. None of them are overbearing, and they do not discriminate between one set of data processes and another. They will, like GDPR or accessible design, simply become industry standards, a price of doing business. No system will ever protect all children at all times from risks, transgressions, accidental or intentional, but starting by acknowledging their special status as children in an environment which is the environment in which childhood now plays out, can only be a good thing. And in an industry dominated by data, then children's data needs its own special consideration. The world has just short of 1 billion children online. Those billion children have a right to be more than clickbait, toiling in the fields of Silicon Valley. And it is up to all of us to advocate for this right and to fulfill the web founder's vision of a better digital world. Thank you very much.